Hello and welcome. This is Tigray TV English service program. I'm with English News here. I am with English News, and I'll proceed to the details. Vulnerable communities have been one of the most highly affected with the ongoing siege, depleting all medical supplies in the region. Our reporter Aragawi Mikhail spoke with Haptom Abadi, president of the Association for Kidney Patients in Tigray, says kidney patients have been one of the most highly affected. Aragawi Mikhail has more.
Lack of medical supplies has affected the most vulnerable members of the community, with children, pregnant mothers, and patients suffering from chronic illnesses being one of the highest affected. Haptom Abadi is a kidney patient and president of the Association of Kidney Patients in Tigray. He said both of his kidneys are failing due to a car accident in 2009.
Shumai Haptom Abadi Bahal.
My name is Haptom Abadi. I'm an IT expert. I was a civil servant. I was in a car accident while I was returning home from Hamar in 2009. I became paralyzed from my waist down, and I had to start using a wheelchair. After the accident, I couldn't control my urine, and finally both of my kidneys failed in 2019. I've been dependent on dialysis ever since then.
Haptom says patients suffering from kidney failure are having a difficult time accessing treatment, with much of the basic supplies needed now unavailable.
After the crisis took place, we were forced to discontinue our dialysis treatment, so many of us developed other health complications. Dialysis is a bit complicated because it requires electric power and clean water, so we sometimes had to go from 10 days to 2 weeks without a dialysis.
According to Haptom, many kidney patients living outside the capital died because they were not able to reach either referral hospital, the only health facility in Tigray that provides dialysis treatment to patients with kidney failure.
After the start of the siege, many of our members that live outside Maqala traveled back and forth for treatment. We're no longer able to make the trip. We have patients in Humara, Shira, Aksum, Adigrat, and Majo, and many other places where patients died due to lack of access to transportation.
Haptom says that the association lost 5 of its members just last week, and while thankful for the medication supplied by the Red Cross that saved his life, he remained concerned about the quantity of medication available.
No medication has come into Tigray since June. Almost all of our members had developed some health complications. I myself was in the emergency room for more than 2 weeks. I had almost died, but thank God, to the Red Cross, I was able to get better again.
Dr. Ephraim Berha, an internist and nephrologist at Eider Hospital, says watching patients die due to lack of essential medical supplies has had a psychological impact on the health professionals working at the hospital.
Well, the hardest moments since the past actually 8-9 months is very difficult to share. Such as telling your patients to stop very life-sustaining and life-saving procedures or treatments just because there are no longer essential medical supplies or treatment aspects or medications to carry on these different treatments. So we are under huge, the healthcare professionals in general of this hospital, we are under huge psychological burden for witnessing all the daily patient sufferings, miseries and deaths of our patients, and it has been our now routine job to confirm deaths, write death certificates for our patients, just because we cannot carry on what was already functioning before the war. Now we cannot function most of the basic life-saving procedures and treatment modalities. So the hardest moment is patient whom you know him or you know her for the last many years under your care, under your follow-up, doing fine with the treatment or whatever procedure has been done. But now all this has been changed dramatically and going downhill and confirming daily deaths and a lot of catastrophes has been one of the hardest moments for me as a physician.
Aksum Referral Hospital is the second largest hospital in Tigray, providing medical treatment to 3 million patients across the state. But its staff members now say the hospital has been forced to terminate much of its services due to the ongoing siege on the region. Wintakiran has more on this.
The 7 months long siege that has blocked all essential items, including food, medical supplies, and humanitarian aid from entering Tigray, has deprived patients from standard medical treatments in almost all hospitals in Tigray. This has led to preventable diseases causing deaths of many individuals. Health workers at Aksum Comprehensive Specialized Referral Hospital say that the hospital has been incapacitated from helping patients because of the blockade.
Due to the total blockade, the hospital is almost unable to provide service. More or less, all basic medical services have been terminated.
The only reason we come to the hospital is simply not to shut it down completely. We send off nearly all patients and treat only few of them with what we have. Meanwhile, many are dying of shortage of medical supplies.
Health workers at the hospital explained that patients' days toll has increased rapidly on a daily basis due to lack of medical supply. The hospital is unable to offer help because of the blockade that has made life in Tigray almost impossible.
Patients are passing away before our eyes. They are not even dying because of their sickness, but because there is no medical supplies to treat them with. It is a very big problem, and health workers are suffering from psychological trauma as they are witnessing such a devastating reality closely.
I'm losing patients while I'm able to save them. It's such a devastating thing to be unable to help your patients just because there is no medicine and because medical supplies are blocked.
The health professionals added that the depletion of basic medical supplies, such as gloves, is putting the hospital and its patients in an even more complicated situation. They also say that they are giving out an expired medicine to patients as an alternative.
All the medical supplies we have is expired. We have long stopped providing up-to-date medicines for patients. The other thing we are running out of is equipment we use in surgical procedure, even the ones that are considered to be basic, like gloves. So we are forced to wash the used ones and reuse them.
Aksum Comprehensive Specialized Referral Hospital used to provide medical services for more than 3 million people. The systematic attack by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces on Tigray's health system, one of the best in the developing world, has led it to a complete collapse.
Patients suffering from chronic illness are just one of the many whose lives are in danger due to the ongoing siege on Tigray. Manuel Jaffer is one of many cancer patients at Ida Referral Hospital, unable to get treatment due to lack of medical supplies. Abraha Gabertense has more on this.
Manuel Jaffer is originally from Alamata, southern Tigray. He was a chemical engineering student and had already been granted a scholarship to attend his graduate degree when he discovered he had bone cancer.
I'm a senior at the university. It's been over a year since I found out I had a cancer. It's a bone cancer. I used to pay 70 to 10,000 birr for one cycle of treatment when banks were still working. But there's no medication now. I don't know what my fate would be now.
Manuel says that doctors were confident about the success rate of the treatment before the start of the war. But now he says he is afraid that he is going to die.
My doctors told me that I would be cured from my cancer if I continued to take my medication without any interruption. My hair had started to grow back, but it starts to fall again when discontinued my medication. Other patients with a similar condition as me have already died. It's been very difficult.
Manuel's mother, Zeno Tesfai, says she is afraid she will lose her son if they are not able to access medication soon.
He had been showing some improvements before, but his health is deteriorating now. His lower body especially is weak, and he's going through immense pain. He takes 4 to 5 tramadol a day. We had a neighbor with a similar condition, and he died recently. I'm afraid the same will happen to my son. I feel like I'm going to lose him due to lack of medication.
Lack of essential services such as banking services and communication in Tigray have further exacerbated the impact on patients like Emmanuel that are not only suffering due to lack of medication but also other basic supplies.
I have rented a house near Idar Hospital for 1,000 birr. My relatives used to help me pay for it. Now everything is unaffordable. I call on all that can help save my son's life to please do their part. Emmanuel is an outstanding student. Everyone knows that. He will contribute his share for the future of his nation.
It is sad to think that I may die due to lack of medication. The pain is so unbearable. You start to wish for your death when the pain starts to become intolerable. I wish I could have a savior. I wish there was a way to save my life.
Earlier in January, Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, described the situation in Tigray as being hellish, and he said all attempts made by the World Health Organization to supply medicine into Tigray has been unsuccessful due to the blockade by the Ethiopian government.
On November 19, 2020, a gruesome massacre would take place in Ahsa, central Tigray, when Eritrean soldiers brutally killed dozens of residents. Our reporters spoke with families of the victims who shared the harrowing turn of events with us. Haile Gebru had the details.
November 19, 2020 was one of the darkest days that the vicinity of Adfitau in the district of Ahsa would witness. In the month of November last year, Eritrean troops would brutally massacred dozens of civilians in the village of Adfitau in central zone of Tigray. Earlier 2021, the United Nations announced that it would be undertaking an investigation of all its atrocities committed in Tigray, jointly with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. However, the truth still remains unfathomable as the investigation failed to examine the places where most of the massacres are believed to have taken place. Ahsa remains one among the many uninvestigated. Amlissa Desta, who is a resident in the vicinity of Adfitau, spoke with Tigray television about how the Eritrean troops massacred 11 civilians, including her father, mother, and her mother-in-law on November 19, 2020, remembering the horrifying day ever in her life.
It was exactly 10 p.m. that the Eritrean forces came and barged in our houses. Sadly, my mother, my father, and my mother-in-law were brutally murdered.
Amlisat added that the Eritrean troops burned down her house while she was inside with her neighbors and family members. After a struggle that took her hours, Amlisat managed to put out the fire with water and suwa, traditionally brewed ale in Tigray. She says that was how she survived the barbaric massacre committed by the Eritrean troops.
By the time the Eritrean troops were massacring civilians, children were crying. Hearing their cries, the soldiers locked the house from behind and put the house on fire. I was with 5 of my family members locked inside the house. 2 of my neighbors, along with their 7 family members, were also inside, helping to put out the fire with water, suwa, a traditionally brewed ale in Tigray, and pudding. The fire was wild and out of our control. The children couldn't resist the heat inside the house. Eventually, we put out the fire, but got so tired from fighting it, and I had to beg them to kill me like they did with others and leave the rest alone. They finally tied us up with our hands behind our backs and took us to the cliff nearby.
Similarly, Gargistas Famikael from the same vicinity said that 5 members of her family and her husband included were massacred by the savagery of Eritrean troops on November 2020.
It was shocking indeed. They went through a lot of atrocities before they were actually killed. They were tied up with their hands behind their backs with rope, and finally they were killed in a horrific way.
Tigrai Tesfai, head of the Ahsa District Coordination Office, said that the atrocities committed against civilians in Tigray were without a limit. Tigrai indicated that, based on the first round of assessment conducted by Ahsa District, a total of 138 civilians were killed in just a single day. Another 83 innocent civilians became disabled. Over 149 houses were burned down to the ground, and many public and private properties have been looted and destroyed by the Eritrean troops.
29 civilians were killed in Adifataw in just a single day. Meanwhile, other 12 civilians were also killed in Debre Harmaz. 26 other civilians were killed in their homes by the Eritrean troops. The cruelty is like never seen before. It was a terrifying experience. Our enemies were trying to scrape our identity, collaborating with outsider allies.
It is to be recorded that Jan Nissen, a professor of geography at Ghent University in Belgium, and his team have been documenting more than 280 mass graves and atrocities committed in different parts of Tigray. Ahsa district was one among the sites under the various districts and administrative zones of Tigray where a massacre took place.
For the past 7 months,
Tigray has been under siege.
And this isn't your usual siege where government blocks all roads coming in and out of a particular city or state.
No, this is the most comprehensive siege of the 21st century.
Everything has been blocked. Food, commercial goods,
Urgently needed aid, medical supplies,
Really,
if you can name it.
the Ethiopian government has blocked it.
and also banks.
The Ethiopian government has blocked banks in Tigray from accessing their customers' information.
So yes, Tigrayans are deliberately being denied access to their savings.
And also, hospitals and pharmacies are running out of all medical supplies.
Hospitals don't have insulin,
Anesthetics,
antibiotics,
Glucose,
They don't even have oxygen.
Also, there's no fuel in Tigray.
not for ambulances,
not for aid trucks attempting to distribute food to the 5 million people in need. Not even for hospitals to run their generators with.
the Ethiopian government has repeatedly attacked
the Tekaza hydroelectric dam.
the only source of power supply in Tigray,
Using drones given to it by the United Arab Emirates.
Iran,
And Turkey.
But imagine, all this is happening and you can't tell anyone about it.
Imagine not being able to hear the voice of your friends and family members.
imagine you're not able to reach out to the people you love and care for.
It's important to remember that everything you've heard about Tigray has been despite a communication blackout that has lasted as long as the deadly conflict.
The videos of massacres,
The stories of sexual violence,
the cases of malnutrition,
everything has been while under a complete communications blackout.
A complete blackout.
no internet,
No cell services,
no landlines.
Nothing.
There's absolutely no way for you to communicate with someone in Tigray.
so you must be asking yourself,
how there is still a television station running from Tigray.
How are we still here?
We have no salary,
transportation is non-existent,
Airstrikes are almost daily occurrences.
and life overall is unimaginably difficult.
but we still manage to make it to work.
And that's because we believe that if you knew our story, you'd care to act.
We here at Tigray Television want to bring the stories of ordinary Tigrayans to you.
We want you to learn about what's been unfolding in darkness.
And we want to help you imagine what life is like under siege. And we're doing this despite all the obstacles because
We trust you care about humanity,
About the struggles of people you've probably never met,
about us,
and the millions more in dire need of humanitarian assistance.
but also because we never want to hear you say,
You didn't know. A recently leaked document from Ethiopia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs gives critics a deeper view of the Ethiopian government's foreign policy objectives, but also reveals some interesting facts about how the Ethiopian government views its relationship with other African nations. Wintakirana has more on this.
Ethiopia's international credibility has been shattered since the start of the conflict in Tigray. Once a regional powerhouse, Ethiopia's name has almost become synonymous to reports on the use of sexual violence and hunger as a weapon of war. But instead of taking decisive action to reverse trajectory, the Ethiopian government's foreign policy strategy has been instead to claim foreign interventions in internal affairs and ignore its obligation to international conventions regarding basic principles of human rights. A recently leaked document from the Ethiopia's Minister of Foreign Affairs accuses countries like the United States and the European Union for attempting to meddle in Ethiopia's internal affairs and calls repeated statements regarding the humanitarian situation in Tigray attempts at camouflage non-colonial intents, and claims that Western countries are meddling in Ethiopia's politics because they don't believe the relationship between the Ethiopian and Eritrean government are favorable to their interests. In a manner reminiscent of Trump era, the document also criticized international media outlets and human rights groups that the state had greatly exaggerated the atrocities in Tigray, saying many of these institutions are known for producing fake news with the intent of destabilizing nations across the world. While the document thanks African states for their support in easing pressure from the international community, the document fails to see its relationship with other African countries as one based on principles and common interests, but instead suggested that political decisions be made to expedite legal procedures.
The Americans are angered by the fact that the African Union Peace and Security Council has so far failed to discuss Tigray and release a communique. The Ethiopian government has confiscated money, minerals, and land from African passengers, asking for the support of Africans before we resolve these issues is an embarrassing weakness. These issues should be immediately remedied so we can continue to have a smooth relationship with these countries.
The resolution of our internal matters was made exceedingly difficult by the role played by external actors. I wish to take this opportunity to thank you all for your support, solidarity, and understanding as we underwent these trying times.
The document indicates that the Ethiopian government is not against the use of forces when it comes to its neighbor Sudan, who it considers to be an adversary in the region. It is to be recalled that Abdullah Hamdok, Sudanese former prime minister, had offered to mediate a truce between Ethiopia's federal government and Tigrayan forces, a suggestion that had angered Abiy, who threatened to withdraw Ethiopia from IGAD in the face of what he saw was interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state. Sudan is currently housing over 63,000 refugees displaced due to the conflict in Tigray, hosting them in camps reopened after they were closed 20 years ago. The leaked document attacks Sudan and encourages shift of power within IGAD to Uganda and Djibouti, taking in consideration of Djibouti's support for the Ethiopian government.
In regard to IGAD, we should work to address the cracks in our relationship with IGAD. The institution should be an important instrument of our foreign policy. After Sudan, the position of chairperson of IGAD should go to Djibouti, Uganda, or other countries that have a more favorable view towards us.
According to Nahu Sennai Belai, political scientist lecturer at Maqala University, Ethiopia no longer has a clear vision to pursue in Horn and Africa in general.
When we see the contemporary conduct, orientation, and thinking of Abiy Ahmed's foreign policy, we can argue that it's a complete shift in orientation. It begins with the definition of the problem. According to the thinking framework of the current regime, their definition of problem is it's not backwardness or poverty or economic issues that were defined as a problem. It's the people of Tigray. All the actions of the foreign policy emanates from this defining Tigray as a problem. The previous EPRDF's foreign policy and its conduct was highly institutionalized. It was policy-oriented, it was quite formal and cooperative in its nature. When we see the foreign policy nature of Abiy Ahmed, it's too personal, it's uninstitutionalized, and even the results are quite different. The previous EPRDF's regime foreign policy results were very known. I mean, Ethiopia was a champion of peacekeeping everywhere. But currently, as we have seen it even in recent developments of in Abiy and other areas of peacekeeping missions, the Ethiopian military or Ethiopian troops are kicked out from peacekeeping missions.
In another part of the document, it is indicated how the Ethiopian government, much like the colonizers a few centuries back, sees itself as a savior of the African people and insists its rejection to abide by international rules on the conduct of war and the responsibility to protect civilians is actually a protest against Western domination.
The president we are setting now could open the door for other African countries to stop being so submissive to the interest of the Western world. This is why America is using every available option to stop us. France and the United Kingdom as well. They want to bring our movement to an immediate end. This is a majority priority for the American ambassador and the African Union.
But the position of Abiy Ahmed and his government as champions of the Pan-Africanism movement raises multiple concerns. For example, in his address to Ethiopia's House of People's Representatives in March of 2021, Abiy Ahmed would by accident reveal that he didn't believe he was black.
የጎንደርና የባህር ዳር ኤርፖርት አሁንም እኮ ለጥገና ቢሊየንስ እየጠየቀን ነው ያለው። ጁንታ ያፈረሰው በሮኬት በእኛው ሮኬት ማንም ሰው ደንታው አይደለም። ባህር ዳር ላይ ሰው ሞቷል። ጎንደር ሮኬት ሲተኮስ እንደ ቤተሰብ ደባርቅ ላይ ያለቁ ሰዎች እንደ ቤተሰብ አንድ ፋሚሊ ያለቃል። አርሶ አደሮች ማንም ሰው ያነሳ። አረ የትግራዩ ይቅር ቤኒሻንጉል ላይ መተከል ዞን ስላለው ጭፍጨፋና መፈናቀል ማንም ሰው ያነሳም። ለምን? እነሱ ጥቁሮች ናቸው፣ አርሶ አደሮች ናቸው፣ ምንም ገንዘብ የላቸው፣ ፌስቡክ የላቸው፣ ሎቢ አይቀጥሩ። ምን ያስፈልጋል ስለነሱ መናገር? አንድ ሰው አይናገርም። ጩኸት ሁሉ አንድ ቦታ የሆነበት ምክንያት የአይን መንሸዋረር እንጂ
I don't think Abiy believed that he is black. He doesn't consider himself as a black person. We have seen in many instances mentioning relegating issues, what we might call the quote-unquote Ethiopian or the Habesha exceptionalism. We have seen that. But he tries to exploit and manipulate the Pan-African notion of blackness and the black resistance, while at the same time crushing the demands of his own people in Ethiopia.
But going even further, Abiy has been known to at times express what could be considered anti-black views.
በቆየው የአሜሪካ የአገዛዝ ስርዓት ውስጥ በጣም የተጎዳ የሚባል ማህበረሰብ ጥቁርና ጁ ነው። ሁለቱም ተገርፈዋል፣ ተጨቆነዋል፣ ታስረዋል፣ እንዳይሰሩ ሀብት እንዳያደረጁ ሆነዋል። ልዩነቱ ጁ ከሲቪል ራይት በኋላ ትንሽ መብት መታየት ሲጀምር ዘፈኑ፣ ግጥሙ፣ ፊልሙ፣ ድራማ ወደፊት ሆነ። እንዴት ዓለምን ኮንከር ማድረግ እንደሚችል ኢኮኖሚክ ፓወር መፍጠር እንደሚችል ያስባል። ጥቁር ደግሞ እዚህ ላይ ቆሞ ትናንትና ኮገረፉ፣ ገደሉ፣ እንዲያደረጉ ይላል። አሁን ያለው ትውልድ ትናንትና ውስጥ እንዲኖር አደረገው። እነዚህ ደግሞ አሁን ነው ነገ ውስጥ እንዲያስብ አደረጉት። 50 ዓመት አልሞላም ጁ ሀብታም ሆነ፣ ጁ ፓወርፉል ሆነ፣ ጥቁር ነፃ ደሃ ሆነ። ነፃነቱን አግኝቷል፣ መዝፈን ይችላል፣ ግን ደህንነቱን መቀየር አልቻለም።
Abiy is of course not the first head of state to attempt to escape accountability for gross violation of human rights by drawing on the mantra of Pan-Africanism. The real question is, will African leaders stand by the true principles of Pan-Africanism to assure justice and dignity for the people of Tigray, a proud African people?
The African Union held its 35th ordinary session this weekend under the theme Building Resilience in Nutrition on the African Continent. But many criticize the African Union for failing to follow through with its agendas and hold countries accountable. AU's 2020 theme to silence the guns is an honorable mention, with last year marking the start of one of the deadliest conflicts in the world by the host of the AU itself, Ethiopia. Abil Zagabo has more.
Historically, regional organizations have played a big role in mitigating and exacerbating conflicts in the world. Historians say that the failure of these organizations to maintain peace and to promote cooperation has led to chaos, injustice, and humanitarian catastrophes of magnificent proportions. The year 2022 marks the 20th anniversary of the founding of African Union as a successor of the Organization for African Unity, OAU. The AU held its 35th ordinary session this past weekend in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with a 2-day session held under the theme Building Resilience in Nutrition on the African Continent. 2 years ago, African leaders had, at around the same time, assembled to discuss on how to reduce conflict across Africa and promote peaceful resolution to conflict under the theme Silencing the Gun. Armed conflicts the African Union and its member states had established was a significant hindrance for African development in the past decades. The African heads called for a gun-free Africa, aiming to prevent genocide, human rights violation, and avert humanitarian catastrophes caused due to conflict. The African states declared with one voice that issues of peace and security should be priority. During the summit, it was agreed that countries have the responsibility to keep peace and stability in both their countries and their regions. In addition, it was said that African leaders should work on building peace and towards the accommodation of different political opinions and assuring inclusive political and economic institutions in order to stop African youth from taking up arms.
A far-reaching joint EU-UN framework on peace and security on the continent. I commend the African Union for making silencing the guns such a prominent part of its work by 2020.
But on the contrary, 2021 would be a year of deadly conflicts across Africa, with government forces and allied militia fighters having killed more than 800 civilians in Sahel region of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. About 700,000 students are out of school in Cameroon due to conflict in the Anglophone region. More than 1,900 have been killed in the eastern part of Democratic Republic of Congo as a result of government forces' failure to protect civilians in conflict. According to a report by Human Rights Watch, the government in Mozambique is accused of unlawful use of forces over civilians in addition to attack by Islamist extremist groups. Most importantly, Ethiopia, as a host for the African Union, has seen unimaginable human suffering due to a genocidal conflict in Tigray. In November 2020, just a month after the summit to stand the guns, the conflict had killed thousands of Tigrayans, produced more than 1 million internally displaced persons, and had forced over 50,000 people in Tigray to seek refuge in Sudan.
Just about 1 million people live in famine-like conditions in the region as the fighting fuels the world's worst hunger crisis in a decade.
Today, the African capital has been blacklisted by the international community as an unsafe destination on the account of the genocidal war waged on the people of Tigray and the national and economic instability it has produced in the country and region.
Denmark and Italy have also asked their citizens in Ethiopia to leave while commercial flights were still available in the country.
The international community, though not enough, has been condemning the ethnic cleansing, the genocide, the extrajudicial killings, the war crimes, and the crime against humanity carried out by Ethiopian government and its allies, including strongly opposing the presence of external forces in the war on Tigray.
Abiy's troops, together with Eritrean soldiers, are accused of committing unspeakable atrocities. Massacres, gang rape, and ethnic cleansing.
However, the African Union has failed to mitigate the hostilities even after the onset of the war, in addition to its failure to make Africa, including Ethiopia, conflict-free. But the African Union has taken its own parts in legitimizing the conflict in Ethiopia, recognizing Ethiopia's government rhetoric of war as a law enforcement operation, and has till this day failed to openly condemn the gross violations of human rights, the blockade of basic services and humanitarian aid into the region, or the continued airstrikes on the civilian installations. Despite the principles of the Union and Africans to condemn the provision of arms to conflict and civil wars in Africa, the Union has said nothing as the Ethiopian government was provided unmanned aerial vehicles by Iran, Turkey, and the UAE. The Ethiopian government approved an additional budget of $2.4 billion, of which 75% has been allocated for the purchase of military equipment. So the question stands, will the African Union go beyond rhetoric and stand up for the millions of Africans in Tigray in dire need of urgent humanitarian assistance, and will do so before it's too late?
4 months, the Ethiopian government has been accused of attempting to use hunger as a weapon of war, with multiple reports of its soldiers partaking in the deliberate destruction of farmers' produce and farming equipment. The African Union held a summit under the theme Building Resilience in Nutrition on the African Continent, but has yet again failed to discuss the crisis in Tigray and the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in the host country. Fani Lumuru has the details.
This weekend, the African Union is assembling for its 20th annual summit under the theme Building Resilience in Nutrition on the African Continent. The summit is being held in the home of the African Union, Addis Ababa, where for the past 15 months, the Ethiopian government has taken part in the deliberate destruction of food items, farming equipment, and has been blocking essential humanitarian aid from reaching the millions of people in dire need of humanitarian assistance. On 4 February 2022, Human Rights Watch highlighted that the government of Ethiopia has for 7 months maintained an effective siege in Tigray, preventing millions of people from accessing food, medicine, cash, and fuel. Set aside the man-made famine in Tigray, there are millions of people starving by drought caused due to a failure of rainy season for 3 consecutive years in the lowlands of Oromia, Somali, Southern Nations, Nationalities and Peoples region, and Afar. According to UNICEF, 6.8 million people in the 4 regions will be in need of urgent humanitarian assistance by mid-March, with over 850,000 children suffering from severe acute malnutrition. In addition to that, around 225,000 malnourished children and over 100,000 pregnant women in need of urgent nutrition support in Oromia and Somalia alone. UNICEF also announced that it needs $31 million to respond to more than 2 million drought-vulnerable people in Afar, Oromia, Southern Nations, Nationalities and Peoples region, and Somali region, and $382 million to help humanitarian aid reach the millions in need across the country. On January 28, the House of People's Representative approved an additional budget of $2.4 billion, allocating over 74% to military expenditure. Just 1.75% of the budget allocated for military expenditure would have been sufficient to address the needs of the 2 million vulnerable people in lowlands of Ethiopia. More shockingly is that just $382 million would be sufficient to address the overall humanitarian situation in Ethiopia. That would be just 22% of the budget allocated for military expenditure. Despite the devastation that has been caused on millions of Africans across Ethiopia, the African Union has remained mute throughout much of the conflict, failing to hold its host country accountable.
The blockade on humanitarian assistance coming to Tigray has had a devastating impact on over the 2 million internally displaced persons in Tigray. Leta Kiros and her 2 children were displaced from western Tigray, where Fano vigilante group from the Amhara region had indiscriminately killed Tigrayan civilians, including her husband. Now her and her children find themselves unable to fulfill basic necessities as the siege on Tigray continues to tighten. Miron Emana has the details.
Leta Kiros is a former resident of Afta Humara. Before the Fano killed her husband and displaced her and her 2 children who suffer from disability. But she says she and her family are still in danger with the blockade on basic supplies, making it impossible for her and her children to access basics like food. A disaster followed after the Fano vigilante group came into Humura's Rudansha. We just started running. We didn't even get any time to lock our house. After they shot my husband, the neighbors helped me carry my children. We only survived by the will of God. Leta Kiros, not only is she unable to afford daily meal for herself and her disabled children, but her children's health condition is also getting worse every day due to the blockade of all essentials, including medical supplies. I went to Aider Referral Hospital several times, but the doctor said my children needed to go abroad for treatment, which I couldn't afford. I can't even feed them and myself. Every night, we sleep with an empty stomach. Lastly, Leta Kiros called on the international community to play its part to ensure food aid and medical supplies are able to reach those most in need. What worries me most is my children's health. Other problems may be tolerable, but not this. Children are